My name is Raleigh, and this is how I went from living a life I hated to selling my company for 26 million bucks. So I never actually thought I was going to be an entrepreneur. I started my career as a lawyer, following my dad's footsteps into law. But 30 days into that job, I had a panic attack that changed everything. 5 years later, I built and sold a company for millions of dollars. And I actually really don't love telling these stories, but I think that there are lessons in my journey that may be actually helpful for you and change the way that you think about your life and how to pursue success. So here it is. Here's how I got trapped in the golden handcuffs and how I found my way out. So growing up, I was the youngest of 5 kids, and my dad was this very well-known litigator. So he was always known for taking down the bad guys, taking on the big cases, and kind of speaking truth and tearing down the powerful. I always saw that growing up, and I looked up to him so much that I thought if law was what my dad's answer was, it should also be what my answer is. And so after I went to college, and it was obvious that I wasn't going to play in the NFL because I was a 5'10" quarterback. And so law was the thing I wanted to do. I studied very hard for the LSAT, the entry test that gets you into law school. I got in the 97th percentile, and I ultimately got accepted into the University of Chicago, which was one of the best law schools in the country. And when I got into the University of Chicago, I thought, I finally made it. I've made it to the top of the mountaintop. I've done what no one in my family had done in getting into a top school. And so I thought I was well on my way to being successful and to being somebody that could be respected. And I actually remember one of the first days at the University of Chicago when I was at the new student orientation. I was sitting at this table next to my professor that was ultimately going to be my civil procedure professor, which is this body of law where you learn how to sue people. And all of these people around me were making these jokes about civil procedure, and the professor thought that it was hilarious. And I just had this sense that I was in the wrong place, that these weren't the people that I wanted to ultimately become like, and these weren't the people that were doing what I ultimately wanted to do for the rest of my life. But I wasn't sure what to do instead. And so I just thought that if I buckled down and focused on law and tried to do as best I could, that ultimately I would have an exit option that would make sense down the road. I just needed to focus on the path that I had already committed to. It was also my alibi, the thing that I could tell people that I was doing it, and it would make me look prestigious. It would make me look smart. And I always enjoyed that saying that I was going to be a lawyer got me a lot of regard with the people that were around me. And so I thought that if I just stuck with it, that ultimately I would figure out something that I enjoyed more than the actual practice of law. And I kept doing that more and more. I went from one of the best law schools to one of the best law firms, thinking again that if I just picked the right mountaintop within the practice of law, that ultimately I would find a path to do something that I wanted. But what I found was, even when I went to one of the best law firms in the country, Skadden Arps in New York City, that the more that I saw the inward workings of what it meant to be a practicing lawyer at a big law firm, the more I didn't like what I saw. But I had no idea how to get off of this path that I had committed to into another path that was going to be able to pay me as much money as I was making as a lawyer, or be as respected as telling everybody that I was working at a prestigious firm appeared to me to be. And so ultimately I just kept on the path. I just kept thinking that if I kept climbing the ladder for long enough, that ultimately there was going to be this way that it was going to work out. And ultimately I remember 30 days into my law firm job at this law firm, I was working out before needing to go into the office, and I got this text message from the boss that I was working for, a guy named Robert. He asked me to come into the office because there was a new deal that I was getting staffed on. I was going to help this life sciences company go public, and it was a process that I didn't know how to do yet, but he wanted me to get to the office immediately. For whatever reason, him asking me to go into the office at 7 o'clock in the morning, I thought at the time that I was having a heart attack. I kept feeling my heart felt like it was beating out of my chest. Ultimately, I learned later that I was having a panic attack. And that panic attack, me laying flat on my back on the floor of the 24-hour fitness in downtown Dallas, Texas, with Baby You're a Firework playing over the loudspeakers, that was the moment that I realized that everyone that I kept trying to please by being a lawyer, my parents, my siblings, my wife, everyone who thought that it was such a good idea for me to be a lawyer, none of them were there for me in that moment of my panic attack. I was there ultimately all by myself. And it helped me realize that I had picked this path to please all of these other people. And ultimately I was going to need to be accountable for what I chose to do in my life. I could no longer use them as an excuse for me not doing what I really wanted to do. And so that was the moment where I knew that I was on the wrong path, and it was time to start figuring out my way out of it. And what happened was, it didn't happen immediately. I then tried to do 4 or 5 additional side hustles while I was practicing law. At first, I tried to get my real estate license, and so I became a licensed realtor, and I tried to sell real estate on the side of my law firm job, and I never sold a house. Then I tried to day trade. So I downloaded all of these courses about day trading, and I tried to day trade on Robinhood while I was practicing law, and I lost $5,000 very quickly. Then I tried to trade tax liens in real estate and do real estate flipping. Basically, I would scour the internet for any way to make money. And if I saw a YouTube video very similar to this that said, this is how this guy made money, then I was like, I'm in. If this guy made money this way, then maybe I can too. And I kept looking for other people that had had success in some avenue, and I thought I needed to follow them into that avenue for me myself to have success. And I kept running into all of these failures. The frustrating part was my job had gotten worse and worse, and I was spending more and more time on all of these side hustles, and none of them were working, and I didn't know what to do. And all of that changed when I told my brother about how frustrated I was at my law firm job. And a couple weeks later, he sent me an email that said, "The unbelievably lucrative business of escape rooms." And it was in 2015. And there was this article about how all of these people were starting escape rooms and they were crushing it, making 50, 60, 70 grand a month operating these very simple businesses called escape rooms. And I never heard of what an escape room was. And I went and I played one with a buddy of mine that was working at KPMG. When I played the room, I felt this curiosity that I had never felt in all of the other things that I tried to do to make money. When I was watching the YouTube videos and I was trying to follow other people's side hustles, I was never really curious about the subject matter about how they were making money. I just wanted to make the same amount of money that they did. And escape rooms felt very unique to me. It felt like something that I could do myself without anybody else telling me exactly how to do it. That it was something that I was interested in learning for myself as a subject matter, not just as the outcome of what could potentially come from that subject matter. And so that night after playing the escape room, I didn't sleep all night because I was just so excited about the idea of quitting my law firm job and going on to this new frontier. Everything else that I had tried, I wanted to do the safest thing possible that would upend my life the least amount possible while pursuing it. That was me doing the real estate thing, the day trading thing, all of those things I wanted to do on the side of my job. And I knew that the escape room thing would require me to quit my job. But for the first time, that didn't feel nearly as scary as it had all of the times prior and all of these other avenues that I tried to make money in. And so when my wife woke up the next morning, I told her that I was going to quit my job and do the escape room business. To her credit, she was totally supportive. She told me, and it was the first time that she told me that ever since I had started my law firm job, I had become kind of a shell of myself. I had just become different. And it was really because I was coping with this idea that I was so miserable in my job and I didn't know how to talk about it. It was scary to talk about the thing that I'd gone to school and spent $300,000 to do, that I wanted to leave that path and go find my own path. And I didn't know how to do it until I'd found this escape room. And so the moment that I decided to do the escape room business and the moment that I decided that I was willing to kind of burn the boats to go all in and do it, things started to change in my life. I found a partner that wanted to do the business with me. My brother wanted to do the business with me. And we had kind of decided that we were going to go on this journey, the three of us together. And my wife was very supportive of that. One of the most difficult conversations during this time was when I decided to tell my parents that I was going to quit my law firm job that they had supported me through and find my own path to do the escape room business. I remember walking into my dad's den as he was typing out a subpoena for a litigation case that he was in and telling him that I was going to quit my law firm job. And he's like, you've only been a lawyer for 9 months. So now that you know how to practice law, what are you possibly going to quit law to do? And I'm like, oh, there's this new trend in Europe called escape rooms and people are crushing it. And he's like, you're going to quit your prestigious law firm job to pretend to kidnap people? Like, what a waste of time. This is the dumbest idea that I've ever heard. It was the first time that I had the courage to make my own decision, even if it meant that I had to be alone in that decision, even if I didn't get the support of the people whose support I really wanted. But it was just the time for me to kind of go and strike out on my own and make my own decision. And so despite their disapproval, we moved to Utah. I moved into my in-laws' basement. And so I went from having a job that made $160,000 a year to making no money. And we thought that we were going to be able to get the business going in the first couple months. And it ultimately took much longer. It took 6 to 9 months before we ever made distribution of the business to the partnership to pay for ourselves in any way. And so despite the fact that I was making much less money than I ever had as a lawyer, I was doing something that I wanted to do. I had followed my own path. I had followed my own curiosity. And I was ultimately committed that there was no way out but through. I had to figure out how to make this business work, even though it was more difficult than I had originally anticipated. I found in my own process, that business was originally called Alcatraz Escape Games. It was an escape room business. And it ultimately grew to include trampoline parks, axe throwing, a concept that I developed from the ground up called Labyrinth, Labyrinth, which was like automated escape room. We ultimately grew to 7 locations in 3 states, Utah, Arizona, and Texas. As the business continued to grow and it became less of a creative endeavor and more of operational and organizational endeavor, I began to start feeling the same way that I felt at the law firm. I felt like the thing that I had built at the very beginning that freed me from law and helped me pick my own path had started to trap me again. And I no longer found the joy that I did at the very beginning when it was a creative and a collaborative effort. And it was just managing the locations and trying to avoid lawsuits and landlords and the complexities of just running a real, actual, true physical business that you don't really hear about. I started to feel the sense of feeling trapped, but it wasn't poignant enough for me to upend my life and to start back at zero like I had when I decided to leave the law. But that all changed on the morning when I got a call from my COO, and he told me that a customer the night prior had played in one of the escape rooms and had broken his arm. Typically, that's not a huge deal. In all of these locations, you have to get insurance. And so anytime you get an injury, you just give it to the insurance company, and the insurance company deals with the lawsuit. But we had just barely gotten a new CFO, and the CFO had forgotten to renew the insurance policy. And the 5 years that I had run this business, on the escape room business, I'd never had one lawsuit ever. No one had ever gotten hurt in the business ever, not one time ever. But even if they had, I always had insurance to backstop it. And so the first time that I ever had an injury in Alcatraz was within a 48-hour window where I didn't have insurance to cover the lawsuit. And that was enough to wake me up, because I had to fight this new fight in a business that was already starting to suffocate me, but that required this new amount of energy for me that I knew that I didn't have. And so there was no way out. I knew that I had to fight this lawsuit internally, and we would have to manage it and pay out the guy. And we ultimately settled for a number that wasn't as horrible as we originally thought. But as soon as I get out of this lawsuit, I'm getting out of this business. I do not want to do this anymore. I want to figure out my way out. And so after I settled the lawsuit, I started talking to potential acquirers of the business. I met with a strategic partner that I had known that was open and interested in franchising Alcatraz. And I talked to them about whether they would be interested in buying all of Williams Entertainment Group, which was the brand that Alcatraz and Airborne and all of these other brands had fallen under. And so I went and met with him at his office and ran him through the numbers. At that time, we were doing $3 to $4 million a year in profit. And I asked him what he thought the business was worth. He called me like a week later and he said, "I've looked at the businesses. I can tell you that your business is worth nothing. You aren't worth anything. Even though you're making $3 million a year in profit, you have these 4 brands and it's not clear how these things fit together. We would only be interested in the trampoline park brand, but we can't even really buy the trampoline park brand because it's so commingled with these other brands that can't stand up on their own." And so I had made this mistake, despite the fact that I was a mergers and acquisitions lawyer, that I had helped companies sell for billions of dollars. The business that I had built myself for myself, I had expanded too horizontally. I had expanded into too many verticals that I made it so no one buyer could come buy the whole kit and caboodle. They needed to buy it piecemeal. And so I realized that I was going to need to do the transactions one by one, asset by asset, brand by brand, and I wasn't going to be able to find a buyer to buy all of it together. So I went and met with a broker after that who gave me a value of the business, who thought that the business was worth about $10 million. And I knew that it was worth more than that. I just was going to need to do the work myself in order to extricate the most value out of it that I possibly could. That ultimately took me on a 2-year journey of needing to sell the businesses off one by one. And ultimately, I sold all of those businesses off for a combined value of $26 million. And I remember sitting and watching the last check clear on the last asset and looking at my bank account, thinking very clearly to myself, I do not think that that last 6 years of effort was worth this amount of money. I realized at that moment something that I never wanted to do again, which was, as I went back to the very beginning of wanting to do Alcatraz, yes, I felt curiosity. Yes, I felt enthusiasm at the very beginning of the process, but I had overstayed my welcome in the business and I should have gotten out sooner. I always wanted to be able to build something that had a clear path to get out of it when it was ready to get out. If I look back at the 3 valuations that I got, the valuation of $0 from my strategic acquirer, to what the broker said that it was worth $10 million, to ultimately selling it for $26 million for myself. The key things between those 3 business valuations, what I did to focus on in order to get the $26 million valuation, were 4 key stories that I needed to straighten out in the business that didn't exist when I was looking at the $0 and the $10 million offer. And they come down to growth, operations, leverage, and defensibility. Anytime that you're trying to sell a business, you have to tell a story that shows that the business can grow without you as the founder being the thing that makes it grow. And so you have to show that the asset can have its own organic growth, even if you're getting paid to walk away. Because that's the problem that every buyer sees in a business is the entrepreneur leaves, what is left of the business. And most of the people, when I was told that my business was worth no money, it was because I was the heartbeat of that business. And if you paid me millions of dollars as the heartbeat in order to walk away from that business, you were left essentially with a corpse. You were left with a bunch of businesses that couldn't grow and had no strategic plan for growth outside of what was in my head. I didn't have any systems that showed how to grow the business without me there. Operationally is the same thing. I built a very flat organization because I didn't want the bureaucracy that I had seen in the other big businesses. So I needed to put operators in place that could continue to operate the businesses without me involved in them. The leverage in the business was about making sure that the books were clean, making sure that financial statements were trackable, and you could very clearly see what the businesses did. And the defensibility in the business was showing that the brands that we had built and the synergies between the brands could coexist, that they drove value to the other one, and that you weren't going to have the business disrupted by a new market entrant because the brands were defensible and they had withstood the test of time. When I was worth 0 versus 10 versus 26, it was mostly a function of clearing up those 4 stories that we told to any buyer, that the business can grow without me, operate without me, continue to have good leverage without me, and be defensible without me. I had removed myself as the key man risk within the business, and that's ultimately what unlocked the value for any particular buyer when it came time to exit. The interesting thing was, when I decided to sell, I had all of these people, the same type of people when I was leaving law, when I was wanting to leave my entrepreneurial path. They also told me that I needed to keep the business, I should continue to grow the business, that I was going to sell it and pay a bunch of taxes and then be left with nothing to do and question what the purpose of my life was. So me deciding to sell, I got all of the same stories about why I needed to stay on the status quo that I had picked. But what happened was, 6 months after I sold, my wife was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer, which was a shock to us. We were 32 years old at the time. She was a fitness influencer. We had no idea that it was even possible for people as young as she was to get cancer. But it was the confirmation that the intuition that I had as the entrepreneur to get out and to sell was the right move. And it allowed me to spend the time with my family that I needed to spend for that time in order to be there for my wife and my kids when I wouldn't have otherwise been able to if I was running 7 locations in 3 different states. And so anytime that I'm talking to an entrepreneur who's contemplating an exit, I'm always sensitive to the idea, if they're feeling the intuition that it's something that they should do, that they should follow it and allow themselves to be freed from the business venture that they get tangled up in. And so for me, the important thing about my journey of becoming a lawyer, leaving law, becoming an entrepreneur, and ultimately leaving the business that I had started as an entrepreneur is the essence of all of those successful moves were I followed my own intuition. And despite the fact that I had naysayers or people who gave me the correct logical answers that I needed to stay, that the new path would be risky or uncertain, that intuition has proved to be right choice for me. And that has always been the thing that has freed me to move on to the next idea, the next thing. In the process of selling, I learned that when I'm running a business, I need to run it as an asset that can survive past me, as opposed to just a business that I can siphon off the most amount of cash to do. So if you got any value out of this business, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And if you ever want to learn more about how to sell your business or how to find your purpose, then go ahead and check out my free newsletter that is linked in the description. I share everything in the newsletter. I share everything that I've learned about entrepreneurship, business, and purpose. See you in the next one. Peace.